SBO is the best.
Alright, let's lock in. In this video, we'll be able to identify the first, second, and third class levers. You'll also be able to draw a simple straight line lever and label the different parts of the lever. Be able to label the effort arm and the resistance arm. You'll be able to calculate and interpret what we mean by mechanical advantage. And lastly, we're going to link sporting actions to the correct types of movements. All right, now let's look at these 5 keywords first. So this whole topic is built from these 5 words really. We have lever, fulcrum, effort, load or resistance, and arm. And you need to be familiar with what this means to be able to access the rest of the topic. In a nutshell, a lever is like a simple seesaw. You can see a seesaw here with people on both sides, and a seesaw can move in either direction, and it's really a smart contraption because it uses leverage to be able to generate more power and more movement than you would be able to by if I told you to just lift this person, by yourself with your own hands. You probably won't be able to do it. But if I told you to lift this person by pushing down on this lever, then you would be able to move them because the lever provides leverage. So a smart little trick that will ensure you always get the lever correct and the positioning of each component correct is remembering FLE 1, 2, 3. So FLE being the component of the lever that is in the middle, and 1, 2, 3 being the lever class. So basically for the first class lever, the fulcrum is in the middle. For the second class lever, the load is in the middle. And for the third class lever, that means the effort is in the middle. And then the other components are on either side. So for the first class lever, we have the fulcrum in the middle, the fulcrum here as the pivot, and then we have the other 2 components on either side. So you can either have the effort on one side and the load on this side, or vice versa, the effort on this side and the load on this side. It doesn't really matter. So we're going to draw the load here. This is the load, and it's obviously acting downwards here. So that's the load. And then we have the efforts, which would also be acting downwards because it's helping to lift this load. So if you want to lift this load, you would have to push down on this. So that's why the effort is here, acting downwards. A classic example of the class 1 lever in action is during elbow extension. For example, when you are pushing up from the floor during a press up, when the elbow joint is being extended, the elbow joint acts as the pivot and the triceps provides the efforts, with your body being the load, obviously. So that's a classic example of a first class lever. Next, we have the second class lever. And for the second class lever, we have load in the middle here. Let me just draw that like this. We have the load in the middle. Load in the middle right here, acting down. And then on either side, we have the fulcrum and the effort. So let's put the fulcrum here, for example. And then we have the efforts acting upwards. So that's the effort. And a classic sporting example of the second class lever is plantar flexion. So when you are standing on your tiptoes, for example, standing on tiptoes, which could be preparing to jump or doing a calf raise or any similar movement. So this is a classic example of a second class lever. All right, now let's move on to the third class lever. The third class lever, we've got the effort in the middle, and we can put the fulcrum and load on either side. So let's put the fulcrum on this side here. And then let's put the load here. It's going to be acting down. We have the load, effort, and fulcrum. Classic sporting example of a third class lever. The third class lever is actually the most common one, so it's found in a lot of different movements. But an example would be during elbow flexion of a bicep curl. So elbow flexion movements, and also during squatting. So it's very common. So you can find third class levers in a lot of different movements. Okay, that's it for the three class levers. Remember, the lever class is based on what's in the middle. Once you know what's in the middle, you can easily put the other components on either side. So remember FLE 1, 2, 3. Now let's move on to effort arm and resistance arm. When you hear effort arm, that refers to the distance from the fulcrum to the effort, and resistance arm refers to the distance from the fulcrum to the load. So it's very straightforward, very self-explanatory. And the significance of the effort arm and the resistance arm is it allows us to analyze whether a lever has a large mechanical advantage or a small mechanical advantage and what that means. So mechanical advantage: if a lever has a larger effort arm than its resistance arm, then its mechanical advantage is greater. And if a lever has a smaller effort arm than its resistance arm, then its mechanical advantage is smaller. And mechanical advantage basically enables a lever to be able to move a relatively big load with less effort. So it gives a force advantage. A force advantage. And if you've got a smaller mechanical advantage, then it tells you that the lever can move a load faster or through a greater range of motion, which is the speed advantage. So force advantage happens when mechanical advantage is high, and speed advantage happens when mechanical advantage is smaller. And it's important to know that usually class 2 levers often give a force advantage. So for example, plantar flexion at the ankle, when you're doing a calf raise, you're lifting your whole body weight just from a tiny ankle, which is obviously that force advantage because you can lift a much greater weight with relatively less effort. Class 3 levers usually give a speed advantage or a range of motion advantage, and this is common in the limbs for fast sporting movements like sprinting or jumping and things like that. And class 1 lever is kind of neutral, so it can be either depending on where the effort is placed. And this is the equation for mechanical advantage. So mechanical advantage is the effort arm divided by the resistance arm. So you take their lengths and you divide them by each other. So for example, if you got a question where the effort arm was 40 centimeters and the load arm or the resistance arm was 20 centimeters, then the mechanical advantage would be 40 divided by 20, which would be 2. And that's a force advantage. Force advantage. On the other hand, if you had the effort arm was 10 centimeters, the resistance arm was 40 centimeters, mechanical advantage would be effort arm divided by load arm, which would be 10 divided by 40, which will give you 0.25. This is a speed advantage. Speed advantage. So that is how you answer those questions. All right, now this is where the big marks come in. Let's apply certain movements to sporting actions that come up in exams frequently. So in the previous video, in the first video in the AQA GCSE playlist, we defined all of the different movements that can happen at certain joints. Now we're gonna combine all of those and put it into actual sports specific sporting actions, and we're gonna describe what's happening. So first example here is a press up. We're focusing at the elbow action during a press up. So the downward phase, we have elbow flexion occurring because the elbow bends, and in the upward phase, we have elbow extension occurring because the elbow straightens up. Next, you could talk about a football throw-in and analyze the movement at the elbow and at the shoulder. So let's say this is our elbow right here, and this is our shoulders right here. So a typical throw-in pattern is you would have elbow extension as the ball is being released, and at the shoulder you see shoulder flexion and a large sweeping action, which can be described as circumduction. If you remember the definition for circumduction, or if you don't, check it out in the previous video, the first video in this playlist. But circumduction is basically a combination of all the different movements that happen at the shoulder to cause your shoulder to move around in a cone-like shape, and that's the type of movement that can happen during a throw-in. Next, we have running. So running, we can analyze the actions at the hip, at the knee, and at the ankle. So you also want to think about it in phases. You know, you have the landing phase and the push-up phase of running. So at the knee, we have knee flexion when you are landing, and then the knee straightens up to drive and to push up, and that is knee extension. So that's at the knee, you have knee flexion here, and then knee extension here as the knee is straightening up. And then at the ankle, your toes, your ankle undergoes dorsiflexion because your toes come up as you land. And then when you're pushing off, your ankle undergoes plantar flexion because your toes push down to be able to push you off the ground. Now let's look at kicking a football. Kicking a football, we can also analyze the movements at the hip, the knee, and the ankle. We have hip flexion as the thigh swings forward. So this is your hip, and as your thigh is swinging forward to kick that ball, that is hip flexion. And then at the knee, we have knee extension as the lower leg sort of sweeps forward, whips forward to be able to hit that ball. We have knee extension. And then we have plantar flexion at the ankle, which is when your foot sort of locks in place in that straight in position to be able to have a great connection with the ball. So that is plantar flexion at the ankle. Now let's look at a standing vertical jump. So you have the phase where you're preparing here, and then you have the phase where you're actually taking off. We're going to focus on the takeoff phase. Takeoff phase because it's important to specify the different phases. We have the takeoff phase, and what happens at the takeoff phase is we have certain movements that happen at the hip, at the knee, and at the ankle. So at the hip, what happens is hip extension. At the knee, we've got knee extension as well because the knee is straightening up. And at the ankle, we have ankle plantar flexion as the toes are going to be pushing down to allow you to get that final push and launch into the air. Next, we have cricket bowling action. Cricket bowling action, you can see this bowler getting ready to throw the ball, and we're going to focus on the actions that are going on here at the shoulder. We've got rotation at the shoulder as this arm sort of comes through. So arm comes through to be able to launch the ball. That is rotation at the shoulder happening, and then that sweeping motion, that cone-like circular sweeping motion can be described as circumduction. Alright, that is it for this video. If you found this video helpful and if you want to build on your knowledge, then do check out our platform Super PE Online for a bunch of resources that will help you take your grades to the next level. Loads of practice papers and a lot of new resources that are going to be coming out soon. So check it out and I'll see you in the next video.